Welcome to Cabot Cove, where the murder is quaint, the technology is suspiciously advanced for 1984, and Jessica Fletcher is your nosy neighbor with the investigation instincts of Sherlock Holmes and the patience of a kindergarten teacher. In this particular episode, Jessica faces down one of her most bizarre opponents yet, a driverless station wagon. Here's how it goes down. The episode opens with scenic shots of the California coast pretending to be Maine. Jessica is cycling along in her sensible sweater when she almost gets taken out by her absentee inventor neighbor, Daniel O'Brien, who is busy fiddling with a homemade heart rate monitor that doesn't work. That he nearly becomes a murder suspect and a hit-and-run victim all in the same breath. Daniel is known around town for his bizarre gadgets, most of which look like they were cobbled together from the junk drawer. Naturally, when a driverless station wagon shows up at the town's Founders Day picnic doing its best Christine impression, and trying to flatten a wealthy Boston businessman, everyone assumes Daniel is behind it. Sheriff Amos, Cabot Cove's finest when it comes to small-town misunderstandings, decides the idea of a driverless car is too much and chalks the whole thing up to mass hysteria. Jessica, however, can smell a mystery, and probably a setup, from a mile away. As it turns out, the picnic victim, Charles, was actually in town to meet his former employee, Daniel. But before Jessica can dig too deeply, the homicidal station wagon strikes again, this time mowing down Charles' business partner, Dean, on a deserted road. This time the car's aim is better, and maybe Dean's reflexes were worse as he ends up dead. Apparently all you need for a driverless car murder to succeed is have a target who is too panicked to step off the road. With Daniel looking guiltier by the second and Sheriff Amos absolutely baffled, Jessica takes matters into her own hands. She tracks down the runaway car in the woods, and in a moment of supreme Jessica Fletcher logic climbs into it herself. Because why not? Unfortunately, the killer is watching from a nearby creepy van, and Jessica's impromptu test drive turns into a slow-speed nightmare as she is driven at a thrilling 15 miles per hour towards a cliff. Thankfully, the killer slams on the brakes at the last second because apparently they're only interested in mildly terrorizing Jessica, not actually killing her. Cabot Cove villains always keep it classy. Eventually, Jessica pieces together the scheme. Turns out Daniel's ex-boss, Charles, and his gold-digging co-conspirator Leslie, who happens to be engaged to Daniel's hapless nephew Tony, were using the driverless car to stage accidents and frame Daniel. The motive? A classic combination of corporate greed and high-tech murder plotting that would make even a James Bond villain say, "Isn't this a bit much?" What works in this episode? The driverless murder car. It's a ridiculous concept, but it's entertaining. In a small town mystery setting where the highest tech device is usually Jessica's typewriter, a driverless car terrorizing people at a slow pace is pretty good. Of course, Jessica Fletcher, she always works. She's the best action hero. Watching Jessica trapped in a haunted station wagon is good for Murder, She Wrote, and it's good for Murder, She Wrote for an action sequence at least. And her mild irritation mixed with genuine curiosity is always priceless. What also works is the guest star Van Johnson as Daniel. What doesn't work? The logistics. Trying to kill people with a remote control car is like trying to take down a burglar with a squirt gun. As always, the sheriff and his investigation skills don't really work. He's convinced the whole thing is mass hysteria despite multiple witnesses. And he's either too lazy to believe in driverless cars or too dedicated to maintaining Cabot Cove's low-tech charm. Jessica's decision-making in this one. Getting into the driverless car alone in the woods is bold, but maybe not her brightest idea. Has Jessica ever heard of Stranger Danger? The episode's big aha moment happens when Jessica is playing Spy Hunter at the local grocery store arcade. While driving a digital car in blazing speed, she realizes that controlling a real-life murder wagon remotely would require an actual skill, a revelation that cracks the case wide open. And as always, this episode has a suspicious romance, which is Daniel's nephew Tony, who is newly engaged to Leslie, a traveling saleswoman, with more interest in Daniel's invention than in Tony. Leslie describes herself as a new sedan because nothing says romance quite like comparing yourself to a mid-range automobile. Her relationship with Tony is about as believable as the driverless car, and you can practically see her mentally calculating the value of Daniel's patents portfolio every time she looks at him. Final thoughts. Hit-Run Homicide is Murder, She Wrote at its campiest. The plot is absurd, the villain's scheme is over the top, and the whole thing feels like night writer wandered into Cabot Cove by mistake, but that's what makes it fun. Jessica Fletcher, armed with little more than a bicycle, can outsmart even the most convoluted tech-based murder plot. Cabot Cove may not have Wi-Fi or reliable police work, but it does have Jessica, and in the end, that's all it needs. I gave this episode a 3.5 out of 5. This episode has some plot holes that you could drive a station wagon through, but if you're here for Jessica Fletcher, then you're in the right place.